They say Friday the 13th is just a superstition, but history tells a darker story. From sinking ships to cities swallowed by floods, from fires that scorched the earth to the ground itself splitting open. Some of the world's most chilling disasters happened on this cursed date. These aren't ghost stories. These are real. And tonight, we'll take you through 5 terrifying true disasters that happened on Friday the 13th. Story 1. The Andes Nightmare, the day the mountain took them. It was Friday the 13th, October 1972, when a Uruguayan military aircraft vanished somewhere over the Andes Mountains. On board were 45 people, including a rugby team, their friends, and family. They had left Montevideo the day before, planning to reach Santiago, Chile. But severe mountain weather forced them to stop overnight in Mendoza, Argentina. When the skies cleared, they resumed their journey, unaware that their route would take them straight into disaster. The pilots misjudged their location. Believing they had passed the mountains, they descended too early. They hadn't cleared the Andes. At around 3:30 p.m., the aircraft slammed into the side of a mountain. The impact tore off both wings. The fuselage, now a hollow shell, plummeted down a steep slope before coming to rest in a desolate glacial valley, 11,500 feet above sea level. 12 people died instantly. The rest, injured, terrified, and freezing, were stranded in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. The temperature dropped below freezing every night. Their clothes were light, their food supply minimal. In the following days, they rationed what little they had: chocolate bars, wine, a few tins. But it wasn't enough. There were no plants, no animals, no way out. Rescue planes flew overhead. The survivors waved, screamed, burned luggage, anything to be seen. But the white wreckage was invisible against the snow. No one saw them. After 8 days, the search was called off. Back home, their families were told no one survived. But in the mountains, 29 people were still alive. What followed was something few could ever imagine. Faced with the reality that help would not arrive and with no food left, the survivors made a collective decision, one that would shock the world. They would do what they had to do to stay alive. On October 29th, 17 days after the crash, tragedy struck again. While the group slept inside the fuselage, an avalanche tore through the wreckage, burying them in snow. 8 more people died. Now, just 19 remain. Despite the grief, the cold, and the unbearable conditions, some of them refused to give up. Over time, 3 of the men volunteered to climb out of the mountains and search for help. Only 2, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa, made it past the brutal terrain. After more than a week of hiking through snow and stone, they spotted a group of Chilean herdsmen across a river. The noise of the water was too loud to speak, so they wrapped a note around a rock and threw it across. It read, "I come from a plane that crashed in the mountains." The herdsmen acted quickly. Within days, helicopters were dispatched to the crash site. 72 days after the crash, the remaining 16 survivors were rescued. They had endured cold, starvation, injuries, and unimaginable psychological trauma. The world greeted their return with shock and questions. Eventually, the truth came out. Their survival had come at an unthinkable cost. Faced with impossible choices, they had done what was necessary to live. And though their decision sparked controversy, many came to understand the desperation they had faced. Even the church offered compassion. Today, the wreckage of Flight 571 still lies in that frozen valley. A simple cross marks the site. The wind never stops blowing there. Some say it carries the voices of the past. Each year, a few of the survivors return to remember, to mourn, and to honor the promise they made, to never forget those who were lost. It was a miracle. It was a tragedy. And it happened on Friday the 13th. Story 2. Black Friday, when Victoria burned. On Friday, January 13, 1939, Australia experienced one of the most devastating natural disasters in its history. The event would forever be known as Black Friday, a day when nearly an entire state burned. This wasn't folklore. This was real fire, and it began with years of drought. By 1939, the state of Victoria had gone through multiple dry seasons. Rivers shrank. Forest floors crackled beneath boots. The summer that year brought searing heat and no rain. The land was primed for ignition, and then came the wind. Some fires had already started in December 1938, small, isolated, seemingly manageable. But by the second week of January, flames were breaking out across Victoria. Then came Friday the 13th. The weather that day was catastrophic. In Melbourne, temperatures soared to 112.5 degrees. In Mildura, it hit 117 degrees. Hot, dry winds gusted at over 37 mph. The humidity was nearly zero. Nearly every region in the state was tinder dry, and the entire landscape was fuel. By midday, dozens of separate fires had combined into an unstoppable inferno. Embers traveled miles on the wind, igniting fresh blazes far from the fire front. Massive trees were uprooted by wind and burned midair. Whole forests exploded into flame. Entire towns were lost. Among the hardest hit communities were Narbethong, Nuji, Woods Point, Nayuk West, Hill End. All five were completely destroyed. In Matlock, a remote sawmill village, 15 people died while trying to flee the approaching flames. Fires reached all the way to the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, threatening towns like Toolangi, Warburton, and Thompson Valley. The heat was so intense, ash fell across the Tasman Sea, reaching as far as New Zealand. By the end of the month, 71 people had died across Victoria, most of them on that one Friday. The fire consumed over 5 million acres of land. That included more than 1.4 million acres of protected forest and public lands, much of it covered in mountain ash trees, among the tallest hardwoods in the world. In total, more than 1,300 buildings were destroyed, over 700 homes, 69 sawmills, and countless businesses, farms, and schools. Thousands of livestock perished: cattle, sheep, horses, along with untold numbers of native wildlife. Habitats for animals like the leadbeater's possum and powerful owl were wiped out. In the Yarra Ranges, the remains of dead, towering trees, called stags, still stand like blackened monuments to that terrible day. How did this happen? Yes, drought and extreme weather created the perfect conditions, but a royal commission later revealed something even more troubling. Many of the fires had been started by people, either carelessly or deliberately. Some were landowners burning off vegetation. Others were campers, miners, or forestry workers. Some even lit fires to protect their properties, only for those fires to spiral out of control. By January 10th, the Great Dividing Range was in flames. By Friday the 13th, the entire state was under siege. And yet, the fire didn't stop on its own. On Sunday, January 15th, after more than 2 weeks of destruction, the skies finally opened. Rain fell across Victoria, damping the flames and bringing an eerie silence. But the land was no longer the same. What once were forests were now smoldering wastelands. Towns had vanished. Entire communities had been erased. The economic toll was devastating, but the emotional scars ran even deeper. People remembered black skies at noon, flames taller than buildings, winds so hot they burned skin through clothing. For many, the trauma never left. In the aftermath, the government launched a royal commission led by Judge Leonard Stretton. His investigation was scathing: negligence, lack of coordination, no fire prevention infrastructure. He called for a complete overhaul. Among his recommendations, controlled burns in cooler seasons, a network of fire towers for early detection, better roads into remote forest areas, a clear division between forest management and firefighting, a dedicated fire authority for rural areas. By 1945, those ideas became law. The Country Fire Authority, CFA, was born and remains the backbone of wildfire response in Victoria to this day. The Black Friday bushfires were a turning point, not just for Australia, but for how we understand and prepare for large-scale natural disasters. They proved that fire is not just a threat, it's a force of nature, shaped by weather, landscape, and people. And yet, the land still remembers. Drive through parts of eastern Victoria today, and you'll see it. Dead trees standing tall above fresh forest, burned scars beneath regrowth. And in the stories locals still tell, passed down through generations. Friday the 13th, 1939. Not a myth, not superstition, a real nightmare. Story 3. Black Friday, the day Kansas drowned. On Friday, July 13th, 1951, the state of Kansas was swallowed by water. That day would later be known as Black Friday, not because of superstition or legend, but because of what truly happened. That day, the sky opened, the rivers rose, and entire cities disappeared beneath the flood. It began weeks earlier. Throughout June and early July, eastern Kansas was soaked by relentless rain. Storm after storm passed through the region. By July 13th, some parts of the Kansas River Basin had received over 18 inches of rain in just 5 days. In certain areas, the monthly total surpassed 25 inches. The ground was already saturated, the rivers swollen. They had nowhere else to go. The flooding began upstream on the Big Blue River above Manhattan, Kansas. It was slow at first. Rising water, soaked fields, overflowed creek beds. Then came the surge. By the time it reached downtown Manhattan, the business district was under 8 feet of water. 2 people lost their lives. The damage was staggering, but the water didn't stop there. It kept moving downstream toward Topeka, Lawrence, and Kansas City. In Topeka, more than 7,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed. Entire neighborhoods vanished. Roads were torn away. Railroad tracks twisted and collapsed. Communication lines went dark. Entire communities became isolated islands in a rising inland sea. As the flood crested, it swallowed over 1 million acres of land, and in its path, it left behind mud, ruin, and silence. Across the region, 116 towns and cities were affected. In total, 85,000 people were evacuated. Nearly 2,500 homes were completely destroyed, and over 22,000 flooded. More than 10,000 farms were devastated. The fertile topsoil of Kansas, the lifeblood of its agriculture, was either washed away or buried beneath feet of sand and silt. In Kansas City, the industrial districts were gutted. Packing plants, grain elevators, warehouses, and factories were flooded and ruined. The Kansas City stockyards, once the second largest rail center in the country, lay underwater. The flood continued east, pushing through Missouri, devastating towns like Boonville, Jefferson City, Herman, and St. Charles. By the time the waters receded, 28 people had died, and over 500,000 were left homeless. The total estimated damage? More than $935 million into $1951, nearly $10 billion today. This wasn't Kansas's first flood, but it was its worst, and many believed it could have been prevented. Decades earlier, during the Great Depression, the federal government had proposed building flood control dams as part of the New Deal. One such project, the Tuttle Creek Reservoir, was meant to control the Big Blue River north of Manhattan. But delays, funding shortages, and political opposition meant construction never began. After the devastation of 1951, everything changed. Business owners, residents, and city leaders pressured the government to act, but not everyone supported the dam. Building Tuttle Creek would displace more than 3,000 people, inundate 55,000 acres of farmland, and wipe out entire towns, including Randolph, Garrison, Stockdale, Cleburne, and Bigelow. 1,500 farm families, many of whom had lived in the Blue River Valley for generations, refused to give up without a fight. They launched protests, wrote letters, and called the project Big Dam Foolishness. But the pressure was too great. The flood of 1951 had left its mark on the American psyche. By 1962, the Tuttle Creek Dam was completed at a cost of over $80 million. According to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the reservoir has since prevented more than $3 billion in flood damage. But it didn't stop all floods. In 1993, both the Kansas and Missouri rivers rose again. This time, thanks to improved infrastructure and early warning systems, no lives were lost. But the message was clear. The fight between man and water is never over. President Harry Truman, after touring the flood zone by plane on July 17, 1951, called it one of the worst disasters this country has ever suffered from water. And the people of Kansas agreed. The day the river rose, Friday the 13th, was unlike any other. A day when water moved like fire, fast and merciless. A day when entire towns were erased. A day when the land itself seemed to turn against those who called it home. Today, the scars remain, on the land, in the records, and in the memories passed down through generations. Not every Friday the 13th is unlucky, but this one was real. Story 4. The night the sea took the Costa Concordia. Friday, January 13, 2012. Off the coast of Giglio Island, in the Tyrrhenian Sea, the night began like many others in the world of luxury cruising. On board the Costa Concordia were over 4,200 people, passengers from around the world, crew members from dozens of countries, and a captain who had sailed these waters for years. At nearly 952 feet long, the Concordia was one of the largest cruise ships Italy had ever produced. It featured swimming pools, a casino, fine dining, and what was once called the largest spa at sea. It was, in many ways, a floating palace. But that night, the ship would become something else, a cautionary tale, a crime scene, and a graveyard. The ship departed from Civitavecchia, Italy, at 7:18 p.m., beginning a 7-day voyage around the Mediterranean. But a few hours into the journey, the captain, Francesco Schettino, ordered a maneuver not on the official route. He wanted to perform a salute, a maritime tradition where large ships sail close to shore to impress those on land. The Costa Concordia changed course and drifted dangerously near Giglio Island. At 9:45 p.m., the ship struck a submerged rock formation. A 174-foot tear ripped open the port side of the hull. Water rushed in. 5 compartments, including the engine room, began to flood. Within minutes, the Concordia lost power and propulsion. The ship was now adrift. The crew tried to assess the damage. At first, the captain told the Italian Coast Guard there had simply been a blackout. Even as passengers felt the ship tilt and heard strange metallic groans beneath their feet, they were told to stay calm and return to their cabins. No general alarm was raised. By 10:39 p.m., the first rescue vessel arrived. Only then did Schettino finally order an evacuation. By then, lifeboats had already been launched, some without enough crew to manage them. The ship, now listing heavily to starboard, made it nearly impossible to lower lifeboats from one side. Chaos unfolded. Some passengers climbed down ladders, others jumped into the sea. At 11:20 p.m., the captain left the bridge. He later claimed he had fallen into a lifeboat. By 11:32 p.m., even the ship's second-in-command had abandoned the bridge, but 300 passengers remained on board. By midnight, dozens of passengers were still waiting for help, trapped, confused, or clinging to the hull. At 12:40 a.m., the Italian Coast Guard famously radioed Schettino and ordered him to return to the ship. His response: "No, I am not going back on board." He never did. The rescue continued through the night. In the morning, divers found 3 people still alive inside the wreckage. But over the following days, the reality of the tragedy came into focus. 32 people died. Their bodies were not all recovered until November 2014. Investigations began immediately. Voice recordings revealed confusion on the bridge, a critical misunderstanding between Schettino and the helmsman, and a delay in issuing evacuation orders. Schettino faced criminal charges for manslaughter, causing a maritime disaster and abandoning ship. In 2015, he was convicted and sentenced to 16 years in prison. His appeals were denied. The environmental concerns were just as massive as the ship itself. The Costa Concordia lay stranded off Giglio's coast, partially submerged on a rocky underwater shelf near a protected marine sanctuary. Over 2,000 tons of fuel had to be carefully extracted. Then came the salvage effort, the largest and most expensive maritime salvage operation in history. Over 500 workers used massive steel platforms, flotation tanks, and cranes to right the ship in September 2013, a full 20 months after it sank. In July 2014, it was towed to Genoa, Italy, and dismantled. The estimated cost of recovery and demolition? Over $2 billion. In the aftermath, stricter regulations were implemented. Cruise ships were banned from performing close-to-shore salutes. Crew training protocols were re-examined. Public trust in cruise line safety plummeted. But for the families of the 32 who died and the thousands more who survived, no law or policy could erase what happened on that Friday the 13th. They remember confusion, delay, darkness. They remember how long it took to hear the call to abandon ship. They remember how some waited to be told what to do, while others made the decision for themselves and jumped. Today, nothing remains of the Costa Concordia. But the story lives on, as a reminder of what happens when pride overrides caution, and how, sometimes, tragedy doesn't arrive in a storm. It sails in calm seas, with a dinner reservation and a camera-ready smile. On Friday the 13th, 2012, a ship that was never meant to sink ran aground and changed maritime law forever. Story 5. The ground shook on Friday the 13th. The Erzincan earthquake. Friday, March 13, 1992. In the quiet hours of early morning, the earth beneath eastern Turkey ripped open. The tremors began without warning. The city of Erzincan, once a tranquil home for over 130,000 people, suddenly became the epicenter of one of the most violent earthquakes in the country's modern history. It struck at 8:18 a.m. local time. Measured at a magnitude of 6.7, the quake ruptured a section of the North Anatolian Fault, NAF, a vast fracture system known for some of the most powerful earthquakes in Eurasia. But for the people on the ground, it didn't feel like science. It felt like the end. The shaking lasted for just under 30 seconds, but in that half-minute, Erzincan crumbled. Buildings folded in on themselves. Homes, schools, hospitals leveled. Concrete split open. Roads disappeared beneath jagged crevices. Power lines collapsed. Gas leaks ignited fires that burned amid the wreckage. The death toll climbed rapidly. By the end, 653 people were confirmed dead. Over 50,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed, leaving tens of thousands homeless. Some survivors were pulled from the ruins days later. Others were never found. The cold March air made survival harder. People huddled in tents and makeshift shelters, surrounded by the ruins of their lives. But the quake didn't end when the shaking stopped. Over the next 3 months, more than 3s and aftershocks rippled through the region. Of those, 505 were strong enough to be located by seismic instruments. Each aftershock was another reminder. The Earth had not yet finished what it started. A temporary seismic network was installed just 8 days after the main quake, on March 21st, stretching across the Erzincan Basin and nearby mountains. For 87 days, it recorded tremors of varying intensity, providing scientists with a rare and chilling look at how earthquakes behave after the initial rupture. The aftershocks didn't come randomly. Many were concentrated along the same fault system, a strike-slip motion running east to west, tracing the scar left by the main event. But what scientists discovered next was even more unsettling. A cluster of around 150 aftershocks was found deep in the southeastern part of the Erzincan Basin, all concentrated in a small volume of just 3 kilometers. Most of them exhibited normal faulting mechanisms, a collapse motion rather than a sideswipe, suggesting extension and tension in the Earth's crust. Satellite imagery later revealed two major lineaments, or cracks in the Earth, where these aftershocks had clustered, hidden fractures made visible only after disaster. Underneath Erzincan itself, P-wave velocities, used to map how seismic energy moves through the ground, were found to be significantly slower than in surrounding regions. That meant one thing: the Earth beneath Erzincan was softer, more vulnerable, and more prone to damage. The displacement model of the quake revealed that the entire basin had shifted northwest, while the southeastern margin stretched and broke. The movement tore at the land like hands pulling fabric in opposite directions. It explained the aftershocks. It explained the damage. It explained why, even weeks later, the ground still couldn't find peace. The 1992 Erzincan earthquake was not the city's first. Back in 1939, Erzincan had been leveled by another devastating quake, a magnitude 7.8, killing over 30,000 people. That event was one of the deadliest in Turkish history. Now, more than 5 decades later, tragedy had returned. It raised hard questions. Why had the city been rebuilt in the same vulnerable basin? Why were so many buildings unable to withstand what experts had long warned was inevitable? And perhaps most hauntingly, why had this happened on Friday the 13th? To this day, Erzincan carries the scars. In the decades since, Turkey has advanced its seismic building codes. Emergency response systems have improved. Fault zones have been more closely monitored. But the North Anatolian Fault remains active. The Earth doesn't care for calendars. And on that cold, gray Friday the 13th in 1992, the ground opened. The past returned. And the city of Erzincan learned, once again, that what lies beneath us is never truly still. So, do you still think Friday the 13th is just bad luck? Or is there something more behind the date that keeps showing up in tragedy? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever experienced something strange on a Friday the 13th? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another chilling tale from Mr. Rainy Night. Thank you.